The Ange Postecoglou era is here, and in this match we saw some interesting attacking tactics from the Australian, but on the defensive end of things, Spurs were truly poor, with Barcelona cutting through the midfield pretty easily. And this is something Spurs have to improve rapidly before the start of the season. But what exactly were the tactics on display? Let's take a look, beginning with Spurs on the ball. In the build-up play, Spurs tended to start with just their centre-backs in the back line, and generally opted for a 2-3-5 shape, and the way that this shape was formed was quite interesting. In early phases of the game, if they were under more pressure, we would see both fullbacks, Poro and Reguilon, look to invert into the midfield alongside Bissouma, which would then allow Skip and Lo Celso to occupy the half spaces, giving them that 2-3-5 shape. What this meant on the defensive end of things is that Barcelona opted for more of a 4-4-2, and this would allow their forwards in Pedri and Lewandowski to go man-to-man with the centre-backs, none of whom are particularly great on the ball. Sanchez in particular was a press target for Barcelona, with the pressure increasing whenever he got onto the ball. At the same time, to prevent them being outnumbered 3 versus 2 in the central region in this first phase, Barcelona defended with quite a narrow midfield 4, with the goal being to cut out this first line so that it was much more difficult to find these men between the lines, especially with these centre-backs being under pressure and not great on the ball. If needed, however, Barcelona could slightly alter this pressing shape to account for the men between the lines much more. This would often be by switching to somewhat of a diamond, with Gavi and Rafinha tucking in narrow on the wider midfielders and De Jong, for example, pressing the third midfielder. This would allow one of the pivots to remain deeper and cover one man between the half spaces, whilst a centre-back could then situationally look to move onto the spare midfielder if required. But this was a less common occurrence. But what was also interesting is the way Postecoglou used his fullbacks differently. Down the left-hand side, Reguilon was given a much more attacking role, which meant that actually, when they had time to get up the pitch, Lo Celso was expected to drop in as the controller and instead have Reguilon pushing high up in the half space, due to Lo Celso's superior build-up ability and Reguilon's attacking streak. Down the right-hand side with Pedro Porro, we could occasionally see a similar build-up shape, with Porro pushing up. So at times, it was both fullbacks high up in these half spaces. However, Porro of the two fullbacks tended to remain deeper, with Skip occupying a freer role in the half space. And with this Barcelona midfield 4 being so narrow, and with Skip being a natural midfielder, what we would often see is Skip looking to pick up space outside of this narrow block, as he could then receive and look to drive up the pitch, or get his head up to find men between the lines, and Spurs could look dangerous when building down this right-hand side. And even when Skip was deeper, Porro similarly would look to explore this space behind the Barcelona midfield. The left-hand side was used slightly differently. It was less about Reguilon looking to find space outside of the narrow block. Rather, Perisic hugging the touchline was often given the first pass, drawing Araujo. And this is where we saw Postecoglou look to use the natural attacking streak and pace of Reguilon, as whenever Araujo was drawn towards Perisic, unlike the right-hand side, where the man in the half space was always looking to come towards the ball, Reguilon would make breaks into the half space to look to get on the end of a pass, to then get a cross in, or alternatively, if he drew Araujo, now Perisic could then drive down that left-hand side. And this led to both of Spurs' goals and several dangerous situations. But the defensive phase for Spurs was truly poor. But let's take a closer look why. It would all start from the goal kick, as Spurs were looking to press high up in a 4-4-2 that consisted of Richarlison pressing one centre-back and Lo Celso, and naturally Barcelona switched to a double pivot of Romeu and De Jong, with Pedri staying high up in the half space, whilst Gavi's positioning, particularly on the goal kick, was more variable, as he could stay wide or drop in. To back up this press, Bissouma and Skip tended to push on to the pivots, meaning that Spurs were pressing in a 4-4-2 with a fairly high line, and this caused several problems. Barcelona could take advantage of this Spurs shape as often as they wished, and in several different ways. Early on in the match, what we would see is that once the ball was live and ter Stegen was on it, either Lo Celso or Richarlison would be forced into pressing the goalkeeper. De Jong, like we have seen, is comfortable receiving the ball under pressure, looking to bounce it out towards the wider centre-back, and this would cause massive problems. Often, Gavi was forming that box midfield, and because Spurs knew they would be outnumbered if they allowed this to happen, Porro was often dragged infield, and this would create a massive problem, as we're all aware of the pace of Balde, who could then potentially make the run down the outside to receive the ball over the top. Even if Solomon stood off of Garcia, Gavi would still look to drop deeper, drawing Porro. Then it would be a foot race between Balde and the midfielder, which Balde would always win. So Postecoglou did look to adapt to this shape at times, as with the pivots being drawn so high up the pitch and Pedri and Gavi in these half spaces, occasionally Perisic and Solomon would have to defend extremely narrow to prevent this midfield overload. But what this now opened up was space for Balde and Araujo to be much more attacking. And in this first phase, with Rafinha also holding the width, Araujo could now be the easy outlet for ter Stegen's excellent passing range. So once again, the Spurs press will be broken easily. So again, when Spurs then look to adapt to that by keeping their wingers narrow, Gavi and Pedri in these situations would often receive the ball again fairly easily with a simple chipped ball into the midfield, thus allowing Barcelona to play forward. And this wasn't even the worst part. Postecoglou's use of Sanchez left Spurs ridiculously vulnerable in this open play phase. To look to conquer the Barcelona box, as discussed, Porro was often inside on Gavi. However, this would mean Pedri was the free man, and instead of allowing him to have the space, Sanchez was hyper-aggressive on Pedri, following him deep even into his own half. And with Porro high, if Spurs were not able to switch into a more compact back three on time, which rarely happened, it left a gaping hole in the centre-back position, and this would be the opportunity for Rafinha to receive the ball over the top, and this happened again and again, even leading to goals. And this problem wasn't a personnel choice by Sanchez, as we saw similar down the right hand side, as when Lewandowski dropped in from the centre forward position, Dyer would follow him deep to prevent that same overload, again leaving a gap that Barcelona could still attack. And Postecoglou struggled to adapt to this throughout the match. It is still pre-season, but this needs to be rapidly improved upon by Postecoglou, as the final result could have been even worse. But I want to know what you thought of the performances of both managers in this match, so drop it down below. And if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this one, taking a tactical look at Messi's most iconic match for Barcelona.